Hello and welcome to A Cuppa with Karen. Today's subjects are on the board. Quick reminder that the Queer Nation organisation formed in 1990.
And our speaker today is Michael Dance, and Michael is a member of the Socialist Workers' Party. He is also an activist in the National Education Union, the trade union, teachers' trade union, and in that he is also on the LGBT organising forum of his trade union. So Michael is going to speak.
So, before I start to discuss some of the ideas in queer theory, I do want to talk about the word queer because, when I was growing up, the word queer was used in a purely derogatory way, in a totally negative way. It was an insulting term used for LGBT people, which was a nasty term and an exclusionary term used to other its subject. And yet, queer theory is something very different. The use of the term in the 90s was deliberately used to fight back and shock, showing that people were not going to take any more oppression. And groups like ACT UP and Queer Nation in the US took the righteous anger over the terrible treatment of HIV, people with HIV and AIDS, and used it in terms of creating public stunts like die-ins to shock the reactionaries in George Bush's America in the early 90s. It was a reaction against conservatism of the USA and a wake-up call to more vibrant, positive forms of activism. So, queer theory, though, or the idea of queer theory, is quite difficult to pin down. It's not a coherent set of ideas, and it's a slippery beast in that way. Some people who are regarded as queer theorists don't necessarily regard themselves as queer theorists, and are sometimes even critical of it. Yet what most share is a rejection of any grand narrative about repression created by forces of the state or from above, and tend to talk about sexuality as a discourse that involves different groups and forms of power in society. In many ways, the founding text of queer theory is Michel Foucault's book, The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, The Will to Knowledge, published in Britain in 1979, well before the concept of queer theory existed. But Foucault's book breaks decisively with a Marxist understanding of sexuality in history. It breaks from the idea that sexuality was the subject of oppression from ruling class or bourgeois forces, and actually sexuality as a power came into existence from the 17th century, and in the 19th century developed its own dynamic. Foucault says, let us put forward a general hypothesis. The society that emerged in the 19th century, bourgeois, capitalist, or industrial society, call it what you will, did not confront sex with a fundamental refusal of recognition. On the contrary, it put into operation an entire machinery for producing true discourses concerning it. Not only did it speak of sex and compel everyone to do so, it also set out to formulate the uniform truth of sex. So far from the Victorian era being regarded as a repressive period with controls to support and bolster the family structure, outlaw homosexuality through the Labouchere Amendment in the 1880s, which led to the trial of Oscar Wilde, the taboos around referring to sex, social restraints on women. For Foucault, it's a period of growth in terms of sexuality and the discourse of sexuality and the flourishing of that. Foucault saw society not fundamentally as a class society, but as a collection of different powers that come into contact with each other, clash or diminish in specific instances.
So, this is he. The Wikipedia fairies are quite into this guy. Um, Lots of little bits and pieces you can read about him. And his book. And yeah, I still can't get the browser to move. I can get it, to do that. Capitalism. Yeah. If the socialist Viva the Revolution happens and everyone shares the wealth equally, within 10 minutes, some people will be richer and some people will be poorer, and within an hour, capitalism will have returned. There we go.
The most important theorist of queer theory, I think, is Judith Butler. And, in the last 30 years, she has become a very important figure. And even though she doesn't or didn't consider herself a queer theorist to begin with, her work, Gender Trouble, is probably, I think I've missed a few now. Yeah. Her work, Gender Trouble, is probably one of the most, is the most influential text on sex and gender in the last 30 years. I think it's important to say that, her effigy has been burnt around the world. When she was speaking in Brazil, her effigy was burnt outside the theatre. She's become a hate figure for the far right. Yet I think Butler's ideas are far from revolutionary. They question traditional ideas about sex and gender. So she does say things like there's no one concept of gender. She talks about how gender is established through medical and legal frameworks. And of course, there's an acceptance of trans women under the identity of woman, good, questioning ideas about what it means to be a woman, or, interesting, important ideas, really. I suppose she's most famous in a sense for her ideas about drag and the idea that gender can be performative, and the idea that therefore she challenges a rigid binary and opens up ideas about gender for discussion. She says gender ought not to be construed as a stable identity or locus of agency from which various acts follow. Rather, gender is an identity tenuously constituted in time, instituted in an exterior space through a stylized repetition of acts. So, all well and good, but there's no mention of liberation, there's no idea about that.
And there's Judith. There's a book. Wikipedia fairies love her too.
Have you read her book?
No.
Because something that she's been saying is like, oh, people haven't read my book, but they're still out here protesting. So what would be your argument in response to that?
Well, as an academic who engages in gender and sexuality studies, I'm very widely read on these topics, and I think that Professor Stock's book isn't exactly of the highest caliber. I would put my attention more in the works of authors like Judith Butler and other trans and non-binary professors who have been writing about this topic for a lot longer than she has.
So, you can see the inspiration that Monica Helms got from Judith Butler in her writing in More Than Just a Flag for the trans movement, transgender movement. And that'll do. I can only get better with practice. So, see you later. Bye.